So good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you to this event looking at the Nordic innovation systems. I'm Rob Atkinson, president of ITF. We've got a really distinguished panel here who I will introduce in just a minute. And as normal, we will should have time for plenty of questions, and we'll adjourn precisely at 10:30. So the first question to ask is, well, why are we doing this event? And I think the reason we're doing it is because as we've studied innovation performance around the world, and as well as innovation policy around the world, we've been consistently impressed with the Nordic nations. By the way, I learned that Scandinavia is not the same as Nordic. It's one of those totally stupid things you wouldn't know unless you're from there. But we do a study a couple of years called the Atlantic Century, where we look at about 44 countries on a wide variety of metrics, like how much R&D is being done, how many new business startups, how many scientists and engineers, et cetera, how much venture capital. And Finland ranks second in that study. Sweden ranks third. Denmark ranks eighth. The United States ranks fourth. In terms of national R&D intensity, in other words, how much R&D is being invested by the government and the corporate sector, Finland ranks second in the world. Denmark is sixth. Sweden is third. Finland led all OECD nations in federal investment in R&D as a share of their economy. Denmark and Sweden are number 1 and number 2 in government funding for university R&D. We're going to be releasing a study in about a month up on Capitol Hill, where we're looking at how major nations, including the United States, rank on university R&D funding. And I can tell you it's nowhere near where these countries are. We all know that these countries are socialists and therefore cannot have a vibrant economy. And in fact, Sweden just recently reduced its corporate tax rate. In 1982, its corporate tax rate was 60%. And that's sort of, I think, our mental image of the Scandinavian and Nordic countries is sort of stuck in the 80s. Now it's was 28%, and they just was lowered to 22%. Ours is 35%. Denmark's rate is 25%, and Finland's is 26%. So these countries tax their corporate sector at a much lower rate than we do.
Actually, it will be 20% in the beginning of next year.
That's great.
It was 24.5, and it's going to be 20%.
Okay. You're actually lowering your rates. We're doing pretty much nothing at this point, although there's certainly talk of doing this. We certainly haven't seen any action on it. Denmark, for example, is 5th in R&D tax generosity. We rank 27th. There's a new study that just came out that many of you saw last week on adult skills, where the U.S. ranked abysmally low. Finland ranks number 1, and Sweden ranks number 4. And finally, these countries also, while they embrace an innovation economy, they also have put in place in the last decade a system that is known as flexicurity. This is this notion that you can still support workers and give them security, but the security is not tied to a job. The security is not about working for the same company your whole life. I'll always remember talking to a Swedish labor union official who had this quote in our book, where he said to me, he said, you know, in Sweden, the unions don't fear new technology, we fear old technology. In other words, our biggest fear is that our employers are not going to be innovative and adopt new technology, because if they don't, we're going to have no jobs, as opposed to perhaps something fewer with new technology and automation. I think that's a very striking insight. But the last thing, I think I've actually figured out the secret of the innovation success in the Nordic countries, and that's the recent study on happiness. And the Nordic countries are among the happiest countries in the world. Denmark being the happiest country in the world. Now, I think it's either because they're doing so great at innovation, they're just incredibly happy, or happiness has something to do with innovation success, or they're completely uncorrelated. We don't know which, but I thought it was interesting at least. So let me start with introductions. On my immediate left is Rolf Hodger, who's the head of the Office of Agency of Growth Policy Analysis and Office of Science and Innovation at the Swedish Embassy. Rolf earned his PhD in political science at Oxford in 2002. He's been an academic at London School of Economics. He's, after that, had a position as head of division of the Swedish Research Council, and also research director at the Ratio Institute, which is an independent Swedish think tank. And what's interesting now is that the Office of Growth Policy Analysis in Sweden is a really cool office. It's an office with agents around the world, and they look at growth policy. How can they learn from the best practices around the world to implement that back in Sweden? To Rolf's left is Jukka Sel-Imedi, who is the Counselor for Innovation for Tekes. For those of you who don't know, Tekes is one of the most interesting organizations in innovation in the world. It's a quasi-government organization that focuses on innovation policy and innovation funding in Finland. He's also, prior to that, was director of VINNOVA, which is the Finnish Innovation Center between 2008 and 2013. He's worked for more than a decade as the head of unit for Tekes in Silicon Valley, here in DC, and also in Tokyo. And he has a master's degree from the University of Helsinki. And last, Niels Heltberg is the Minister Counselor for the Danish Embassy here in the US. He's a graduate of political science from University of Copenhagen and attended Georgetown University also in graduate studies. He's worked with the Foreign Ministry prior to that, and also was with the Danish Ministry of Finance. So with that, I think we'll get started with Rolf.
Thanks. All right, this thing started here. No, how do I get over to my own one? You know this will work. We got it. It's coming up. It's coming up. Okay.
Wrong. That's mine.
We can
There
just
we go.
switch. There we go.
That'll be fun if we made each other good. Okay, well, thanks. It's very nice to be here and be able to talk to all of you. I'm going to spend just 10 minutes talking about some of the Swedish developments. It's a small and open economy, so I think we're pretty dependent on actually staying competitive and also to utilize the knowledge that we can acquire from other nations. That's a basic premise, I think, and that's one of the reasons we need to stay knowledge intense. And we are doing reasonably all right. I think there is an innovation scoreboard from the European Union, and Sweden is up there. Finland and Denmark is also doing very well, I should mention. So doing well according to the official metrics. I should say that countries like Switzerland and US are also doing very well on these metrics. Another success indication, I suppose, is the GDP growth development for the last sort of 10, 15 years. If we have an index from 100 since the year 2000, you can see that the Swedish curve, which is the red one, is basically going better than the OECD average and the US average. So we have had significant growth. So I think those are two sort of important success indicators as far as Sweden are concerned. And especially, I think we've done fairly well after the recession crisis here. So fairly good recovery, I would say, at least until last year. There are also, I should mention, perhaps some worrying signs. We have had falling private investments in R&D in the last 10-year period. I think we have gone from something just below 4% down to roughly 3.12%, which still is a fairly high figure, but it's obviously a big loss. There has been concerns, I think, about some inefficiency in the Swedish research system, perhaps especially the university research system, that you're actually putting quite a lot of money into it, but not necessarily getting as much publications and patents as such as you would like out of it. Countries like Denmark, England, Switzerland may be more efficient in some of these senses. And there's also a discussion, I think, about the limited conversion of research into commercialization. I think this is slightly an empirical question, and it can be questioned whether or not this is a problem or not, but it's certainly one of those things that are being discussed in Sweden, I think. So I think we're doing all right, but there's no need to be complacent. We need to take care of these somewhat worrying signs. Should also say that if we look at the 2000 to 2013 period, we had a good period of growth, but the years preceding that were actually pretty bad in some senses compared to the national average. So we need to stay on top of our feet and also consider what we have done right in the last number of years that were not going equally well before that, perhaps. Now, one of the things that we have adopted in Sweden is an innovation strategy. Here's a very important lady in my life because she ultimately pays my wages, the Swedish Minister for Enterprise. she has adopted research or innovation strategy with a focus on innovative people, higher education and research, framework conditions, innovative businesses, public organizations and regions. However, this was adopted almost precisely 1 year ago. It's not a long-standing thing. It's a policy that does not have a very specific focus. It tries to pick up most elements in the Swedish innovation system. And it does not contain specific budget proposals in itself or prioritizations. And granted this profile and that it's only been in place for 1 year, I think it would be somewhat difficult to actually claim that it's the innovation strategy that has been responsible for the relatively positive development in Sweden over the last 10 to 13 years. So I will try instead to go over some of the policy reforms, both on a sort of framework or macro level and some more specific initiatives that have occurred in the last 10, 15 years, basically after 1990, which we had when we had a crisis in the Swedish banking sector. One of the important reforms, I think, was that we have made the central bank independent since that period of time. Sorry about this, I'm not fully in control of this.
I got it.
You can take care of it. Anyway, we have established what used to be a less independent central bank is now basically fairly independent of political management, like you say, and they have a mandate basically defined only in terms of maintaining a 2% inflation target. That's attributed for macroeconomic success as considerably important. Another thing that happened was that we used to have a currency of Swedish krona which was tied to different either other currencies or indexes or costs, baskets of currencies, and we floated that in the early 90s, and I think that has probably made a big difference. We have a balanced budget requirement since the mid-90s in Sweden. There's been several budget reform acts basically. And the balanced budget requirement in Sweden is basically, it's such a kind that you don't have to be balanced in an individual year, but over the cycle, over a business cycle, it should be balanced. So you have some ability to compensate when things are going down, but on the long term it should be important. In the same process, you have a budget process where you basically set an expenditure on ceiling and then prioritize with investment spend. We also had a fairly, I think, important reform of the pension system. And basically, it introduced this constraint. We have a pay-as-you-go system where the current working generation pays for the currently retired generation, but we have now tied it so that basically what is paid out to the current retired generation cannot be larger than the revenues coming in from the currently working generation. So you don't make basically unfunded commitments, and I think that has been fairly important in stabilizing public finances. And there have also been various markets and regulations, air traffic market, telecom, electricity, public services, credit markets. Public services might be worth mentioning that I would say that Sweden today probably have one of the most deregulated school markets, for example, for education markets on the K-12 level, which has opened actually a lot of market activity. I would need to move on to the next one. Are we able to move forward? Well, here we go. There are also some, so now I've spoken more of sort of general framework conditions that I think may have contributed to the growth of innovativeness, of course. And here are some of the more sort of short-term measures that have been adopted basically during the current government. We have had a sort of centrist right-wing governments into 2006, and some of the policy reforms they have introduced have been to do with several ways of decreasing the tax rates on work. You have made it slightly more difficult to obtain unemployment benefits, not really lowering the levels of the unemployment benefits as much as being qualified for the unemployment benefits. You have introduced tax breaks for domestic services and service sectors, and the service sector is an important growing part of the Swedish economy. As Rob said, you have lowered the corporate tax rate to 22% from last year. I would say, but this may be contentious, that post 2008 we have basically adopted a policy of limited austerity. There has been certainly sort of policy discussions in Sweden regarding this, whether or not you should heavily make public investments or less heavily in Sweden, and basically the left-wing opposition arguing for more public expenditures. And I think what basically have been the conclusion is that the finance minister have been pretty tight with his budget on the whole set. So sometimes I hear the argument in Washington DC that what is wrong with Europe is too much austerity. My impression is not that this will be true of Sweden necessarily, but to some extent it's a matter of interpretation. And I would also say that the current government, to some extent at least, have permitted creative disruption. We have had at least one large car company of our own, which basically was allowed to go bankrupt for practical purposes. So, one has allowed sort of some firms to be weeded out to the market. There have also been some public support efforts, but I wouldn't say they have been on an industry-wide level now, generally speaking. And so basically the previous slide was largely about the revenue side on taxation, etc. On public expenditures, I would say that the initiatives in the last 7 years or so, they have basically been investment-oriented rather than consumption-oriented. There has been a fair amount of investment in research, in 2 successive research and innovation bills. So we have basically increased the budgets by about 9 million for this time period between 2009 and 16. And that can translate into something like a 25–30% increase of the budgets for publicly financed R&D. And also it means that we have basically climbed for something like 0.85–0.9% up to the 1% level of government financing of R&D. And there have also been heavy investments in infrastructure. So I would say the profile of the public expenditures have been sort of investment-oriented rather than consumption-oriented. And I think that's one contributing success factor possibly. Lastly, just a few words about the Swedish ecology of innovation. The most important actors in the Swedish ecology of innovation are the private companies. They have been doing 2–3% of GDP as investments in R&D. As I said, it has fallen in the last few years. It tends to be large multinational firms that have contributed to this, so it's a fairly concentrated measure, but that's not unique to Sweden. We also have, I would say, in terms of especially publicly financed research, a fairly strong university sector. A lot of the resources are being channeled into the university. And we have had a comparatively weak research institute sector. We have a set of industrial research institutes, but my estimate would be that they don't have the same weight and significance as some of the other systems have had. So that also contributes to the last point. I think there has been an emphasis in public financing on basic research rather than on the applied research. And if I compare to my Finnish colleagues, I know, for example, that Tekes has a very large budget in Sweden. The Swedish Research Council, which is the basic science funding agency, has a considerably larger funding than VINNOVA, which is the innovation-oriented and applied research, basically. In terms of the research financing agencies, we did introduce some reforms around 2001. We basically set up the structure of new finance research or research financing agencies. The core of those being one, the Swedish Research Council, which, as I said, is fairly well funded and basically deals with all fields of basic research, and the second one being VINNOVA, which is promoting innovation and to some extent also applied research to a larger extent. And then there are also some additional, slightly smaller research councils dealing with labor markets, social affairs, one of them dealing basically with environment and agricultural research and stuff like that. But I would say that this is a very brief summary of the Swedish landscape. But with that, I think I will leave the torch on to my next
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
You gonna put it up? Okay, good morning everybody. As mentioned, my name is Jukka Salminen. It's a very pleasure to be here, and thank you for the Institute and Stephen particularly to invited me here. What Rolf started is many of the issues are actually the same in Finland, and it's not coincidence. I think we're very much benchmarking internally inside of the Nordic countries what the others are doing, and trying to copy the best part of it. I will say a few words and show some statistics about the Finnish innovation ecosystem and also about the strategy. Respond to any of it. Okay, just. So I guess we will flip through quite. Okay, good. A few words about the Finnish economy. I think I fully agree with Rolf saying that it's sort of okay. So Finland as a part of the Northern Europe has not been the most affected on this financial crisis. I think we had a really heavy hit in 2008, but the recovery and anyway the kind of the let's say the managing the financial issues in I think Nordic countries has always been tough. So we still have a AAA rating, and I think the debt level is still manageable. It is increasing as many times in the tough times. The government is actually spending more, and that's something that has kind of raised some issues in the last couple of years. And you could say that we have also mild austerity measures going. The Finnish government has started a long time ago as Sweden to try to reduce the size of the government, and I think that has been maybe a little bit more successful in Sweden, but Finland has done tremendous progress on the same issues. So the investments in research and development innovation are still in the high level. The question, I guess, is also in Finland in the future, then what is the private sector's role and actually how they are keep it going. Robert mentioned about the PISA studies. Finland has run very well in about the educational system. It's mostly public. There's also kind of piloting ongoing in there, and I think that's one of the key points. And positive side, we are finally seeing some kind of upcoming sectors, more driven by startups like the gaming industry. Everybody knows probably Angry Birds, and yesterday Finnish company called Supercell was sold to the Japanese at 51% to the SoftBank and some other development company. I think with $1.5 billion, it's a small company. So in a way the value creation is something that we are very happy. We have been trying to establish kind of venture-based startup culture based on the Silicon Valley for the last 25 years. And now there seems to be something happening in there. At least it also draws attention from both the countries and Russia. Then the minuses, many of the leading industrial sectors that has raised Finland since the Second World War are already maturing or matured. And that clearly shows in a way that it has been almost like a perfect storm. And our unemployment is still in an unacceptable level in I think around 8%, and we are not happy about that. Aging society is a big issue in Finland and has been some time, and it's very difficult to actually to be really innovative and with the aging society. So that's something that we are trying to deal with. And I think one big minus is low foreign direct investment in Finland. It's not only the geographical location of Finland that it's not so appealing to some people from Silicon Valley, but anyway, it is also that I feel there has not been strong emphasis from the government in kind of maybe idea that we can do it ourselves, and we are doing that in a way that has been lost. What else we are losing when there is no foreign direct investment? Please next one. So here, same kind of a charts the same countries. Our Scandinavian colleagues and Israel, Korea always comes on these. And Finland is still between 3.5% and 4%. So I would say that's a very high level investment. And some of the international comparisons, Finland has ranked very well. I would draw attention to the second one, where Finland dropped to the 20th point. That has been one of the lowest ranking for a long time. And they just picked the same issues that, you know, the foreign direct investment was clearly the sore part of Finnish innovation ecosystem. And that's why I want to raise it up. The R&D expenditure, as you can see, it's mostly private. So enterprises are the 70% is the enterprise side, and only 30% is actually the public side. And this has grown quite nicely since I would say the mild austerity measures in Finland in the last couple of years. You can see that there is also tapering in those issues. And, I think it's also a political debate right now that, you know, what is the right level, as we have to cut back in many other areas in social services, that how much, what is the right level of investment. Next one, please. I just want to show it because I think this is one issue about that the Finnish public sector layout is fairly simple. So we have under Parliament, the government, and the Prime Minister is heading the Research and Innovation Council that has many cabinet ministers and others part in there that is actually in charge of the whole innovation strategy in Finland. But then we have in the under Ministry of Education and Culture, that's the basic research side. And we have Academy of Finland, that is actually the funding for the ministry, and then the universities. And then in the I would say applied science and research and development, we have the Ministry of Employment and the Economy, and then my agency, Tekes, is the funding arm for the ministry. And then VTT is our national labs. They are actually fairly independent. I think only 25% comes from the government public. And then other funding is either private or from the different EU and other sources, competitive sources. But anyway, it's fairly simple. All the other players has a minor role. I've seen in some other countries, there's a lot of ministries, very complex systems, and I feel at least in Finland this has been so far working fairly well. Next one. I'm not going to go, but I just before I go to the current innovation strategy, I would like to show that there has been a long tradition on trying to do something useful for the country related to the science and technology and nowadays innovation policy. And you know the chart or the line in there is about the R&D expenditure from the GDP. And there has been steady growth to the last 2 years, and it's now in the question mark. You know, there is a political discussion about it. That, you know, what is the right level of that? The next one. Then about the Finnish innovation strategy that was prepared in 2007 and 2008 and launched 2008. So we had 4 full years of implementation for that part, and the drivers that time that many of them are still relevant for the globalization. Finland, as a small, open, export-oriented country, is very, or totally kind of dependent on the global economy. So this is, I guess, Finland is one of the highest-ranking countries where the export and actually all the global trade is very important. The sustainable development was a big discussion in those days. There was I can very easily remember that there was a lot of discussion about energy prices and climate change and issues those, and I can say that we couldn't see the shale revolution, for example, that has happened in here in the United States that has global impact in the longer run. But in 2008, it was discussed that that how dependent the United States is about in energy, and China growing, prices will go up the roof, and in a way it's kind of being part of the foresight activities. I can confess that we couldn't see this coming in as we should. And then, of course, the ongoing acceleration of the speed of different technology development, not only in IT, but also nanotechnology and others. So kind of felt that it was very complex and fast evolving issues, and the government felt to some kind of need to have better grip on it. And then the aging population, as was mentioned, was also one of those things that kind of highlighted the importance of innovation. The focus of that strategy was in the, what is the role, how Finland can play in the global value networks. The other really important part was on the user demand orientation, in a way that Finns traditionally has been really good on developing technology, and kind of technology push was a big part of it in the 80s, 90s. Then the discussion started changing in a way earlier, and in 2000, when this was made, it was very clear that that was not the strong point of Finland, to understand the global markets, the consumers and citizens from different countries, and that's why it was highlighted. And then the other part, Finland and maybe other Nordic countries too, has been a lot geared with the large corporations and their ability to innovate. And this was clearly something that was considered dangerous, not least because of Nokia's development in rise and fall, basically, but also it was understood that, hey, that's something that clearly what we were missing was a vibrant startup culture in Finland, and it was not easy to establish, basically. Finland is far and don't have that kind of capital, and how to get the mindset changed. And then about the systemic and multidisciplinary approach, particularly systemic in a way to understand it. It's not one agency, it's not the tools what the agency uses, it's actually the whole ecosystem that you need to be tapped on. In our case, that many times is global. So those were the kind of focus of that strategy. Okay, so what we got out of it, I think it's still the strategy, so we haven't renewed it. I think in particularly, kind of we highlighted the urgency in Finland, basically, that these are really difficult times and we really need to put some emphasis. And I think in the discussion about the user demand orientation, I have talked with lots of people in university, and I think that has changed in Finland. I think it's much better right now that they see the opportunities, not only that this is interesting, but this is actually also could be a big business. And many times those are not, those are not conflicting. That anyway, that it can be interesting also with academically, but it could have a real good opportunity. And I think, that has been something that I'm hoping will, bring new fruits to the table in the future. And the other part is the individual, that understanding that this is actually a game of individuals, and really important that we kind of try to embrace them. It has been kind of a difficult in this kind of homogenic culture to try to kind of highlight individuals, because that has not been kind of the basic norms. But this has, I think, has at least started to change in Finland. That people understand that it's really beneficial if somebody makes a big sale, and it is actually one of the way of the future. The next one. Yeah, I'm finishing this my last. Okay, this is my last one. Okay, so the lessons learned in a way in the kind of long policy involvement in Finland is that you need clearly have a long-term political consensus on the R&D investments. That this cannot change, every year, even 5 years. In Finland, we have multi-party political system. We have 4 parties having 15 to 20%, and then small parties the rest. And it's always a kind of coalition. So what I mean in Finland, you always have a change in coalitions, but they all basically has still kept some governments more, some governments less, and many times actually in tough times they have kind of doubled down in R&D investments. That has been beneficial. It might be difficult today to discuss about the consensus, political consensus in DC, but I'm really hoping for the sake of Finland that something happens today. Then the strong educational base, I think that's for the small countries. It's absolutely must that you have to have a good educational system and university system. It doesn't work without it. And then about the role of the simplicity that I showed about it, and also the independent role of the agencies involved. And then the last one is the most important, the agility. That, none of the plans what we make right now will come through in even 2 or 3 years. So how you are able to, roll with the punches. That's the, that's the part. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Niels?
Thank you, Rob, and thank you for inviting and for organizing. Thanks to Stephen as well. I will also give you just a brief overview of the Danish sort of political societal model before turning to the Danish innovation strategy. Not to brag, but because the Danish model also has its shortcomings and its challenges, but just to simply give you a background for the Danish innovation strategy and approach. We, as the other Nordic countries, are also a small, open economy, even smaller than Sweden and Finland. We're a quite small country, homogeneous, about 5.5 million people. And as you said initially, Rob, we rank on top in terms of happiness and on various wellness indexes. I'm not quite sure how you measure it, but of course, we take it as a testament to the success of our model. We also rank as one of the most competitive economies in Europe. It hasn't always been like that, but we do now. We have a well-educated workforce. We have a very flexible workforce, and we seem to have basically been able to combine a welfare state, a pretty comprehensive welfare state, with the competitive labor market and entrepreneurial activity. The Danish economy is considered to be one of the most sound economies in Europe these days. Again, it wasn't always like that. I think Sweden had its big crisis in the 90s. We had our big sort of economic crisis in the beginning of the 80s, which was the beginning of a period with a new sort of economic approach in Denmark. We have also been affected, of course, by the economic and financial crisis, but Denmark has basically come out of the crisis in pretty good shape. We have relatively low unemployment, about 5.7%. It should be lower. It had been lower, but still, if you compare it to the rest of Europe, it's and considering the crisis and all, it's quite good figure. The employment rate is about 73%, which is also quite good. And the unemployment rate for women is just almost the same as for men. That's a different trait that is somewhat different from many other countries at least. We have fairly sound public finances, very limited public deficits, and a public debt of around 45%, which is not too bad, again, relative to other European member states or European countries. And we have been able to retain our AAA credit rating even in these times.
Sure, bring that up.
Well, appropriate day to bring that up. I know the US is maybe about to lose its AAA rating with one of the other credit agencies. True. Let's see. Anyway, I should also mention that we have a very strong focus on green growth. We have invested quite heavily in green technologies, especially wind, since the 70s. Issues such as energy efficiency, renewables, waste and resource management, clean air, water, and sustainable cities has become deeply embedded in the political system and has become a very central part of the Danish economic approach. We have actually, since 1980, just to give you an idea, since 1980, the Danish economy has grown by almost 70%, almost 80%, while our energy consumption has remained stable, and our emissions have actually gone down. And we are aiming at becoming independent from fossil fuels by 2050. So we are very focused on green growth. The Danish welfare state, as I said initially, is often taken to be the explanation, or at least the background for this economic success. What is the Danish welfare state then? Well, the guiding principle is that everyone should contribute according to ability and benefit according to need. There's quite broad public and societal consensus around this basic notion and about this goal and about this basic idea of how to organize the society. Of course, there are differences between the various political parties in Denmark, but still you have seen the development of the welfare state based on a quite broad political consensus over the years. Not just the current social democratic government, but also when we had a central right-wing government and previous to that. The key feature of the welfare state is, of course, that all citizens have the right to, well, they have security and they have a right to a number of welfare benefits, including unemployment benefits at a quite high level. We have free education from kindergarten all the way through high school and universities are free as well. A quite generous child and family policy, comprehensive care for disabled people and for the elderly, and universal and equal and almost free access to healthcare. That's the benefit side. I should perhaps also mention, you mentioned it, Rob, this quite distinct Danish approach to labor market policy, which is often labeled flexicurity, which is of course a combination of flexibility and security. Flexibility in the sense that we have rules that makes it quite easy for employers to hire and fire workers, employees, enabling businesses to adjust to economic traits, enabling businesses to adjust their workforce to production without suffering great costs. And we have unemployment security in the sense that, you said it, Rob, not in the sense that employers or that workers are secured their particular work, but in the sense that that workers are secured a minimum wage or a minimum amount of benefits that make sure that they can maintain their standard of living even in times when they perhaps get laid off or are between jobs. And on top of that, we have a very active labor market policy to sort of facilitate this flexible labor force, workforce. So this flexicurity model is it's a quite distinct feature, I think, of the Danish labor market model and has proven its worth in good times, but also during the crisis in terms of keeping unemployment relatively low. Of course, we also have our challenges. We have one of the most comprehensive welfare states, I think these days even more comprehensive than Sweden, which used to be maybe or epitomizing the socialist welfare state. But it's also, the Danish model is also one of the most expensive models, of course, not surprisingly. Total public expenditure represents close to 60% of GDP. About 30% of Danish GDP relates to public social expenditures. And about 30% of the Danish workforce is employed by the public sector. We have one of the highest level of tax income relative to GDP. We have a lower corporate tax than the US these days, that's true, but apart from that, our tax level is much higher. The marginal tax rates peak at around 63% for the very high income earners, and the average is about 40%, and the value added tax of 25%. So the tax level is very high. Nevertheless, this has proven compatible with competitiveness over the years. We, as I said initially, we are a competitive economy in spite of this very high tax level. But of course, there are limits to how much taxes can be expanded further. There's an ongoing discussion in Denmark that has been for the past 50 years, I suppose, about what is the limit of taxes, and the overall trend has been that taxes have gone up. So the limits were not reached at earlier points, at least. But there is a limit somewhere, obviously. We also have a number of other challenges. We're still, affected by the economic and financial crisis. More structurally, we have the challenge that citizens expect services of an ever higher and more individualized quality in parallel with growing prosperity. We have demographic challenge. We have an aging population, not as bad as many other states, but countries, but we do have that challenge as well. Another key challenge is to strengthen labor supply and foster employment among immigrants. We have perhaps not done as well as we could have done, and that has proven to be a challenge. And for a number of years, we also had a productivity challenge. We were lagging behind other countries that we usually compare ourselves with in terms of developing productivity. So that is also part of the background for the Danish approach to innovation. The Danish welfare model has been reformed quite substantially over a number of years, but not least over the past couple of years. Let me just mention a few initiatives. Pension reform, not least. We are gradually phasing in later retirement from the labor market based on indexation of retirement to life expectancy. There will be a gradually phased in shortening of the duration of unemployment benefits from 4 to 2 years, still at a very high level, but still reduced from 4 to 2 years. Various initiatives have been taken to support earlier study start and earlier or quicker completion of studies in order to get people to join the labor force at a faster pace. And there is a stronger focus now on improving productivity and supporting competitiveness and growth potential. So that brings me to innovation, which is of course a key component in securing this enhanced productivity. One could argue, I think you also mentioned it initially, Rob, that a massive welfare state with this high level of taxes could work as an impediment to innovation. And as I mentioned, we have for a number of years lost competitiveness relative to other countries. So there has been a quite clear recognition in Denmark that we need to become more innovative, both the public and the private sector. And not least a recognition that we need to be better able to turn innovation into business, not just having a high level of education, but actually using that level of education in terms of producing and making sure that we can turn it into action. Given the size of the Danish public sector, the Danish public sector does play a quite important role in terms of facilitating and stimulating innovation. Public procurement is one way. Denmark has been working quite focused on developing models for competition for public contracts, contracts that can be used as a tool for testing best providers at best prices and so on. We have also been quite focused on using public institutions as a test market for innovative solutions. And the Danish public sector has actually succeeded in becoming a leader in the adoption of IT and new technologies in terms of improving welfare services. Healthcare, clean tech, welfare services are the main areas. But obviously innovation is a product of many factors. Education and research and development is one of the most important factors, obviously. And again, the welfare state can act as a driver to heighten the overall level of education, and has very much done so in Denmark. Almost 8% of Danish GDP is allocated to education. We have a very ambitious strategy for the numbers of Danes holding a higher education degree. The target is to reach 50% of the population in 2020. We're around 40% now, so we're not that far from it. Around 22% actually have a graduate university degree at this point. our R&D investment has been growing for many decades and is currently just above 3%, which is again fairly good in most comparisons. But as I said, investments is one thing, allowing investments to actually disseminate into services and products is another. We have an excellent research base, but we have been looking in Denmark into how to translate this into actual products. One approach that the government has taken and that fits well with the Danish society is to facilitate the creation of clusters among various business sectors and in affiliation with knowledge institutions, universities, and so on. And this has become a very strong trait of the Danish landscape. And then we have also launched quite recently, a couple of years ago, a Danish innovation policy. This is of course not to say that our innovation approach is completely new, but it has been a way of course looking into how we can further innovation, and it also reflects perhaps a more strategic approach to innovation in Denmark than was the case earlier. Sure. I'll make it quick then. The strategy contains a number of initiatives aimed at both businesses and the public sector institutions. The strategy, just to make it very short, focuses on turning research into innovation, jobs and growth. It focuses on creating more demand-driven innovation policies and building greater exchange of knowledge between universities and businesses. It focuses on heightening the sense of entrepreneurship among students from very early ages and all the way through university. It focuses on creating strong partnerships in the private and the public sectors to be able to find solutions to some of the major challenges facing modern societies, such as aging populations and access to clean air. So I think I will end by that, and just reiterate that while the Danish model, of course, has some challenges, and while we have to be aware that this huge welfare system can act as an impediment to entrepreneurship and innovation, you can, or our experience shows that by a sort of focused effort, you can also make the public sector a driver for innovation and actually use it in a productive way, rather than being an impediment to growth and innovation. Thanks.
All right, well, thank you to all three presenters. Let me just make a couple of quick comments, and then we'll open it up to you all for discussion. You know, it seems to me that there's a famous book written in the 60s or 70s called Varieties of Capitalism, which made an argument that this view, this sort of Anglo-Saxon view, there's only one kind of capitalism is really misleading. And I think we've heard this. There are different ways to succeed in the global economy, different flavors and models. What strikes me about this, though, is on the one hand, if you compare these countries to the U.S., I heard about balanced budgets over the business cycle. There's a radical idea. Making sure your entitlements are pay as you go. Okay, we don't do that. Making sure that your corporate tax rates are competitive in the global economy. We don't do that. And increasing public investments, particularly in science and education. Well, we don't do that either. And finally, having strong innovation institutions themselves. We have Tekes in Finland, VINNOVA, and then Danish Technology Institute, is that right?
Yes, the Ministry for Education and Innovation is actually sort of integrated, reflecting perhaps this more strategic approach.
Yeah. Okay. So again, it looks to me that there are certainly, I think all three speakers talked about the challenges each of their countries face, and there's no sort of perfect country in this model, in this world. But I think there's a lot we can learn from these three countries. So with that, if you have questions or comments, you want to just raise your hand, identify yourself, and we can go from there. Yes, sir.
I'm Jerry Haig from Center for Innovation at the University of Maryland. As an academic, I probably should know the answer to this question, but I don't. I'm interested to know, in the 3 countries, are there institutional barriers to academics, that is civil service requirements, that prevent them from easily starting small high-tech business? I know that's the case for France and Germany, but the Nordic countries, I don't know.
Very good.
I don't think there is actually a big kind of restrictions to it. I think it's more like the state of mind. And, many people going to academic research basically never thought they would get out of there. But I have seen in more and more kind of going back and forth that I think it's very useful in those. Finland made a fairly intensive kind of university reform in 2010 and 11, and I think that has kind of helped also. There's some more independence on the universities, and I said, the whole innovation strategy was pushing people more individual innovation and also thinking about the demand orientation. So I think that we'll see. We can see it in the younger age groups that it is different.
You can leave it on.
Well, I should say, first of all, I'm not a specialist in this. My impression, though, is that there are not large legal impediments prohibiting academics from starting up businesses, and sometimes they do successfully as well, I should say that. I think there are institutional impediments of another kind, basically that the universities tend to promote academic research. That's what you get promoted for. That's a basic problem. There is a special, or pretty special legal arrangements in Sweden, which is called the teacher's exception, which basically means that if you are employed as an academic at a Swedish university and you come up with some kind of invention, for example, you individually basically hold the intellectual property rights to that. And there's been a fair amount of discussion as to whether this is a good arrangement or if it would be preferable that the new university as a corporation should hold those legal rights. So far we see no change, and I think my personal impression is that it's subject to debate whether that would be, the one or the other arrangement would actually be more conducive to entrepreneurship and innovation.
Rolf, do you just want to talk just for a second? There's that new program that Sweden put in place on higher ed allocation funding, 5% based upon, I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, 5% based on industry support for research.
Well, Sweden has had 2 research and innovation bills, one 2008 and one last year. Well, it's had a number of years, but I'll limit myself to those. They have introduced reforms in terms of how allocation of research funding is done. Basically, what has happened historically is that you have had an incremental change of the budget that you had the prior year. You just sort of count it up by 5% of whatever money is available. That's still the dominant theme for research funding in Sweden. However, you have also put away, now I have to say it's a while since I worked with this, but it's something like 5 or 10% of the total budget, which is allocated on a competitive basis between the universities in order to drive quality research, obviously. And you have also introduced similar reforms, not only for research, but also for the teaching components. I should not say anything about the industry component because I'm not well informed today of it.
And you've done this as well in Finland, right?
Sorry?
You've done a similar reform for university R&D.
Yeah, that's what I mean, and my understanding is that in the last reform is also that the IPR is owned by the universities, just to speed up basically the process to get the inventions out. And anyway, the Finnish funding, for example, Tekes funding is all competitive in a way, and for university side, 1/3 that goes to university projects, they always demand funding from the companies. So we're kind of trying to interlink academic research to the companies, and small companies to big companies.
Could I just get a clarification on that? I'm sorry, did you say that 5 to 10% of the university budget was allocated for R&D? Did I understand?
No, allocated on a competitive basis. on
But it's
performance.
still
Basically, the universities get a fairly large proportion of their revenues as block grants from the government, and it's 5 to 10% of the block grants for research to universities that are being allocated from that basis. That was what I was trying to look into.
Yes, you can leave it on.
Just a short remark also in trying to answer the question. I'm not sure exactly what impediments are in place in France. I don't believe there is any legal impediments in Denmark either for academics to start new businesses. But as perhaps is the case in Finland, you mentioned that there's a cultural barrier for sure, and there is a certain academic approach, traditional academic approach in the universities that perhaps does not facilitate entrepreneurship to the degree that the government would like to see. So that's part of the innovation strategy to work with the universities, to work with research institutions and other institutions in order to try to maybe change that approach a bit and make it more problem solving, if you will, make education more conducive to actually entrepreneurship rather than just heightening the academic level per se. And then of course we over the years and are still trying to look into better regulation in order to make it easier for entrepreneurs to start new businesses in Denmark. It hasn't always been that easy. The tax level, the number of regulations have perhaps made it excessively difficult for young entrepreneurs to start new businesses, and that's something that is being looked into in order to ease that transition from universities or whatever knowledge institution to actually turning this knowledge into business.
Denmark also has a special, they're one of 10 countries now that has a special bonus R&D tax credit for companies that invest in university and research partnerships. They get a higher tax credit than they would otherwise. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, my name is Dan Hjalmarsson and I'm Director General for the Swedish Agency for Growth Policy Analysis. And thank you for your good introduction. Innovation starts with kindergarten. Innovation starts with basic school, basic education. And we have heard, and we are so impressed about Finland and the PISA ratings. And what is the secret behind a good and entrepreneurial, innovative basic school system? Because that is the basis for everything. And what about Finland? Let's hear the secret.
I'm not an expert in the education side, and I see the kind of the PISA studies and the educational side that has been long tradition in all the Scandinavian or Nordic countries anyway. Also in Finland, how to utilize the total talent of the small nation, because we are small and we are actually maybe more knowledge oriented and also innovative. So how to squeeze out from the small number of people the best what you can squeeze. I think that has been kind of the idea for the Nordic countries anyway. I think what we're trying to do is the link between how to have very good public education and then how to mix it with a Silicon Valley atmosphere, basically. And I'm seeing something happening with the university reform. Aalto University was created by merging, the business school and the arts and the Helsinki University of Technology, and they really kind of try to create something we call startup sauna. Everybody knows that it's nice to go to sauna. So how to create also kind of communities, people helping each other. And we haven't got the mix right yet, so in a way that all the universities and all the science, research, education done in Finland would actually turn out to be. But I'm seeing something. I'm very happy to see the video game industry, the gaming industry. There has been a push in Finland for the last 15 years from the Tekes side, for example, trying to help it, and lots of collaboration between Aalto University and Stanford University, and try to help. What is the framework that we can do? But I don't have any secret to the PISA studies. I think that the next studies that will come out, I think in I think it's every 3 years that, will show other countries coming up and Finland. But, I'm confident that we are still somewhere there in the top.
I just don't want to remember I saw them, so Eric.
Yeah, Eric Pages with Onboards Consulting. I'm working on a project now related to IT clusters, so I'm selfishly interested in what's happening in each of your countries' strategies you've got to support ICT clusters.
What was that word, IT what?
Information technology, ICT.
ICT.
IT what? Clubs?
Clusters.
Clusters.
Yeah, regional.
I actually think that the times of clusters in a way is done. I don't see that as a hugely important, at least for government side, to try to do that kind of determine what are the future clusters that business should take. I think there has been a time when there was a heavy emphasis on clusters and also regional science parks and others. But I think it's more individual. The idea in Finland that the government should kind of enhance the environment and the framework, but actually the business and the decisions has to be done on the private side. So maybe I misunderstand it in a way. We did 2007. We established what's called strategic centers of strategic centers in science and technology and innovation. That was actually pooling, like a little bit like what you said on clusters, large corporations and universities, and they actually established like a R&D company jointly. But their idea is more in how to drive the pre-competitive R&D jointly, kind of raise the level and leave then to actually applications and others for the companies to themselves to compete. But anyway, maybe a little bit like what you are saying, but I think the current ideas for the future are kind of more global society, individual, or kind of developed society, ideas that Finns should be involved in those networks, not that it will be 100% in Finland, but maybe 1% in Finland, 10% in Finland, and 90% from somewhere else.
But don't you have that little city up north? I mean, everything's up north in Finland. North of Helsinki is like 50,000 people.
Yeah, all
Tekes is supported.
Yeah, no, it is in a way, but that is in a way also kind of a regional activities earlier. And I think Nokia had a big part of it in around the University of Oulu and others. But I think we have learned that it's really difficult government can't actually plan and do Silicon Valleys around the world. That it's a historic development in ecosystem that grows, and it's really difficult to force it to grow. That you need to, and I think the biggest part is a mindset. It's not actually that we couldn't have the capabilities, and many places do, but the mindset actually that let's do it, and that's what I'm hoping that we see some early signs in Finland around the Aalto University and the gaming industry. So hopefully.
But you're not saying that Tekes is not doing any direct funding anymore.
No. We are fully doing, but anyway, it is more idea to keep a competitive, atmosphere, that there is not a free lunch, but anyway, the decisions, what to do is mostly for the customers themselves to decide. Certain areas, but they are not clusters anymore. The national programs, what we try to initiate, they are much more on kind of the edges of or cross sections of the clusters, and I think gaming industry was a good example. There was a heavy kind of support involvement to but all the credit goes to the companies that actually did it. But anyway, it was one of those areas, and we're trying to develop a pocket.
Anybody else?
Yes, just the Danish approach is very much not one of sort of top-down, creating top-down clusters or picking the winner. Our experience is that, well, maybe not our own experience, but the analysis is that picking the winner often turns out to be picking the wrong winners, because it's hard to identify what will be the future and so on. But having said that, I think the Danish approach is one of sort of, which goes very well with Danish society, because Danish society is very much one of organized interests. It's very much in the Danish culture to organize yourself around common interests. So there is a natural tendency for many businesses to to get together, to talk together, to lobby the government in an organized way. And on that basis, we've been trying to create sort of cooperations between government and knowledge institutions and businesses within various sectors in order to sort of simply map and analyze and identify what can be done to facilitate certain industries or certain businesses. So without sort of picking the winner, we do try to support certain technologies and certain businesses. Also by simply, I mean, we have around Copenhagen and across the sea to Sweden, across the bridge, there's a bridge to Sweden, the Malmö, the southern Swedish region is quite intensive in terms of knowledge institutions with the University of Copenhagen and then a big Swedish university there as well, and other research and knowledge institutions there. So we have tried to also facilitate in terms of infrastructure that this area can function as a unit, and that it can or try to enable this assemblance of knowledge to dissolve into or disseminate into actual business and actual production.
Well, there certainly are some clusters in Sweden, and there's certainly a lot of talk about clusters in Sweden. It's being appreciated as an important factor in growth and knowledge creation. From my about 10 years of working in this field, I've seen few government policies that actually promotes clusters for the reasons I've been mentioned, but they have emerged spontaneously. What you have seen in terms of government policies in R&D funding, I think, is that you have put some emphasis on creating what you call different kinds of centers of excellence, where you have focus resources in particular areas, in particular regions, after competitive calls for applications, etc. But then you have selected, and I think there's always been a hope that around those academic centers of excellence there could possibly emerge clusters on a case-to-case basis.
Yes, sir.
Yes, just a follow-up on the earlier question related to the confluence of institutions and individuals and the role in entrepreneurship and innovation. I heard a number of you talk about entrepreneurial mindsets, and that becomes very critical. Steve Holmberg, professor at American University in the area of entrepreneurship. And I'd be interested to get some perspectives in both the role of universities, particularly schools like CBS, where you have one of the largest, Copenhagen Business School, largest incubators in Denmark, School of Entrepreneurship in Stockholm, which is a consortium of 5 universities, which is very creative. And what you see is the role of universities in entrepreneurship and changing mindsets, and then a follow on it with Rolf on the area of Sweden, listening to Minister Loof at the Swedish House of Sweden a year ago, talking about pushing innovation education and entrepreneurship education down in the K through 12 system to change the mindsets of young people coming up. So they don't only think about working at IKEA in the large corporations. They think about being innovative, think about being entrepreneurs. They think a very different way as they go through their K through 12 system.
Who wants to jump to that? Yes.
But just to start off about Denmark and CBS, the Copenhagen Business School, which is basically a university, but a university with a very different background and approach if you compare it to the more traditional universities, namely, I mean, the CBS approach has from the very beginning been one of educating students into concrete business, whereas the traditional universities have had a much more academic focus. And the CBS approach, if you will, is very much on the rise in Denmark. I think that's definitely one of the challenges for Denmark is to turn the knowledge institutions into something more focused on businesses and on actual production rather than just heightening the academic level for its own sake. The paradox perhaps is that the Danish elementary school system is actually very much one of a problem-solving approach. We have, for the past 40 years, not have a very strong emphasis on learning numbers and figures and geography and so on, but rather on learning, getting the kids the ability to work together to actually solve problems. But in the past couple of years, we have also realized, though, that we may have gone too far in that direction if we compare ourselves to China and elsewhere, and seen that the Danish kids are simply lagging too much behind in terms of basic knowledge. So you can't do one without the other, and you can't do the other without the one, so to speak. So there's a challenge there about finding the right balance and perhaps a coherent approach all the way from preschool to throughout university.
Why don't we just have Rolf answer this one? I think we got a bunch of others.
Well, we have a fairly lively business environment in Sweden, but on this question I would say that the entrepreneurial culture is probably something where Sweden could learn from the USA, basically. And there is quite a fair amount of talk about introducing elements of this into both higher education and into K-12 education. And initiatives are being taken. My main impression would be that we are more in this starting off initializing stage, while as you are more mature in these senses. That would be my main thing. I think that this is a very personal observation, not speaking as representative of the Swedish government right now, if I may do that one of it. I think that there is an issue that's worth thinking about there, and that's the attitudes towards risk taking. And I think that in America there is a larger openness on the societal level and on the individual level towards taking risks, while as Sweden would probably be very concerned with limiting risks, and I think that's also implied in the social security arrangements we have, etc. So that is something I think that for the longer term is worth thinking about for both of our societies.
Here and then here. Yeah.
Scandinavian Brookings Institution. I think I heard that 25%, only 25% of the national labs, and I think Finland, are funded with public finance. And I'm wondering what the private sector financing model looks like, and then also how that impacts sort of the research profile of the labs. And here in the United States, obviously, most of the money is federal, and so most of the research is very mission-driven from a DOD or DOE perspective. I'm just curious how that works.
Yeah, I think the focus of what's the Technical Research Center of Finland, it's a national lab, is different. They are focusing on applied science, so they don't do basic research. That's the role of the universities, and they are doing applied science and basically helping corporations to in their efforts to develop new products. So that's why there is that direct budget funding has kind of a smaller and smaller, and it is run with 25%. Then other competitive funding, for example, EU and even our funding, where they compete with other consortiums, is a big part. And then I would say the last third or 40% is from the private companies that they serve individually or as a consortium. I think that's a big issue, is the focus that it's not basic research.
Yes, sir.
Well, actually, this is more in the form of a comment. I'm Fred Fleming. We're going to have to call the third divide about online collaboration. First, I wanted to say that the things that make entrepreneurs different are not knowledge or skills, it's their attitude. And we used to joke about training entrepreneurs and giving them MBAs. And the joke was if an entrepreneur needs an MBA, or 10 of them, he will hire them. He doesn't have to become one. And it's important to understand somewhere along the line that the people that have the inventiveness are not necessarily the people that can run a startup company. So it's important when you're talking about innovation strategies on a national level to make a distinction between inventors and entrepreneurs. I can come up with more ideas than I could form companies to promote. Which brings me to the second point. I'm constantly working on multiple projects, currently 5. None of them is a full-time job. I think of these as gigs. like going to a nightclub and performing as a guitar player in a blues band. They don't constitute a full-time hourly wage. And not all of them will ever pay off. But one did quite handsomely, and it's a publishing model, and I have a large residual income from an ongoing project, and I can stick around with good ideas. The final thing I wanted to say was, you were talking about pushing entrepreneurship down to K-12 and changing the mindset early, and then the Danish elementary schools were focused on problem solving. When someone brought up the attitude toward risk-taking, don't think that entrepreneurs are big risk takers. They don't want to take risks. They don't want to lose their shirt. It looks like that from the outside, but they're just certain this is going to work, and they're going to make it work. And to them, it's not a risk. And to the Swedish policy guy, I wanted to say, I will. What's the biggest hold up to entrepreneurship and innovation? And at least in Washington, it's access to capital. I can't get the banks to fund this, and when I go to the vulture capitalists, they say they want a 500% return in 3 years. What?
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Jeff Weiss from Georgetown. Would you say that there are important industries in Scandinavia that are resistant to disruptive innovation, that present big obstacles, that are entrenched enough to fight it off?
Everybody gets along in Scandinavia. There's no conflict.
Might go ahead and try and answer that question from a Danish point of view. I think it might be a bit different from a Swedish or even Finnish point of view. Denmark is a very small economy, and we traditionally do not have sort of major industries that are dominant in the economy. So I think, I mean, of course, we've had a period of deindustrialization dating, well, hard to say exactly when that was, but certainly the latter half of the 19th century. And since that period, I don't believe that we have had any sort of major industries that are impeding innovation or are sort of hindering new innovative industries to actually to blossom. I don't think that would be the major problem in the Danish context.
Maybe a little bit in the case of in information and communication technologies, the size of Nokia in Finland in one point of time, I think was not all beneficial for all the other industries in a way, because they were able to employ basically everybody that had interest on technology in many areas, and sometimes even before they finish their university degrees in a way. So I think we will see in there have been a tremendous amount of new companies, startups established based on the people laid off from the engineers from Nokia. So we will see actually how this could work out. But I met in my work in tremendous amount of different sector companies, and most of them have somebody from Nokia in there. So they have spread around in industries, and maybe that's something that might have been in Finland in one point in time, that actually the one sector withdrew so much talent that basically maybe some others were so.
Well, this was a question I really had to think about, and I'm not sure I have a good answer anyway.
If you have to think about it, it means it's not there.
Could be. I think that Sweden is generally exposed to harsh international competition, and the aggregate tax burden is fairly high, so I think that the companies have had to stay on their feet and incorporate most improvement potential that have been available. That would be the general image. I don't think I would guess there are not systemic problems of that kind. That being said, I would, on the other hand, be intellectually surprised if there is no occurrences of this. One thing I have been told about, which I don't know personally about, is that in the maritime transport sector, apparently there are sort of technological landwings available that have not actually been utilized in terms of better engines and things like that, but that's only sort of second-hand hearsay.
I think we have time for one more.
Thank you.
We're saying the order, so, yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Isaac Cohen. I'm a private consultant, basically on economics in Latin America. I have been impressed by the fact that nothing has been said, or last, I didn't understand it perhaps, about the role of defense spending in research and innovation in Scandinavia. I was trying to think of things that the United States has, and probably Scandinavia doesn't have. And this may be one of them. I'm not sure. I'm curious. I remember in the days, for instance, when Sweden was trying to sell cars based on this capacity to build airplanes. You know, there were commercials in the United States when you saw a Swedish jet flying, and then it was a commercial for a car. Is there anything happening there?
Well, that's Saab.
It's not solved.
Yeah.
Well, Saab is still there, not the cars, but the airplanes are there. So they're still trying to build airplanes, and they're trying to sell airplanes or military airplanes around the world. And there were large public investments in those projects at one point in time. And I think it's always been an argument in favor of those investments that it would have various spin-off effects. And we also have at least one large multinational company, Bofors, who produce defense materials of different kinds and possibly others as well. So we do have a presence in that sector. That being said, it's not the case that we have nearly the same proportion of R&D in defense spending as you do in the US.
So I think with that, we have to stop. It's right at 10:30. So I want to thank all of you for coming today. This video will be up on the website tomorrow if anybody, colleagues, want to watch it. And please join me in thanking our three excellent speakers.